Moving into my lake cabin was supposed to be the start of something peaceful. Just me, the water, and a new beginning away from the chaos of the city. But within 30 minutes of unloading my boxes, Karen showed up with a clipboard and a scowl. "You can't move in without HOA clearance," she snapped. "This shoreline is under our control." Then she called the cops, claimed I was trespassing on community-managed land. One small problem: I didn't just own the cabin, I owned the lake. So while Karen was flapping her binder at the officers, I handed them my deed, complete with riparian rights. And by the end of that week, I filed the paperwork that legally banned her entire HOA from ever stepping foot near the lake again. Sometimes, the view comes with vengeance. Some people buy a lake cabin for the views. I bought mine for the silence. Tucked away at the far end of a winding dirt road, hidden behind a canopy of pine and oak, it was the kind of place where phone service gave up, the air actually smelled like water, and the only thing louder than the birds was the occasional slap of a beaver tail on a lake surface. It wasn't fancy, just a 2-bedroom cedar cabin with a screened porch, a half-rotted dock, and a fireplace that creaked louder than it burned. But it was mine, all of it. I had the paperwork to prove it. The land, the shoreline, and the portion of the lake touching my parcel. All deeded, surveyed, recorded. And on move-in day, I finally arrived with nothing but a few boxes, a mattress strapped to the top of my truck, and the kind of smile that only comes when you know you've left the noise behind. That lasted about 34 minutes. Because then came Karen. I had just finished setting the mattress down in the living room when I heard the crunch of gravel outside. I stepped onto the porch and saw her. Khakis, sunglasses, and a branded fleece jacket with the words Ridgewatch HOA stitched in cream thread across the chest. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She held up a clipboard like it was a badge. "You the new occupant?" she asked. "I'm the owner," I replied. Her eyes narrowed. "Of what exactly?" "The cabin, the dock, the shoreline, this whole parcel." She squinted toward the lake, then looked down at her clipboard. "That's not possible. This section falls under the Ridgewatch HOA's environmental zone. Did you register your move-in with the board?" I paused. "No, because I don't belong to your board." She clicked her pen. "All lake-adjacent properties are under HOA supervision. You'll need to sign the residency acknowledgement packet." I laughed, not mockingly, just because it was absurd. "I bought this cabin last month, direct from a private seller. It's not listed as part of any HOA." Karen didn't blink. "That's a mistake. Everything past the North Bend belongs to Ridgewatch Community Perimeter. You're on managed shoreline." I stepped down from the porch and pointed to the wooden survey marker near the waterline. "That marker right there? That's from the county. This is private land. I even confirmed my riparian rights." Karen folded her arms. "That dock looks non-compliant." I almost asked, non-compliant with what? But I already knew what she was doing, asserting fake authority, relying on pressure, waiting for me to back down. She had no idea I wasn't the backing down type. Things escalated fast. Within 10 minutes, Karen had pulled out her phone and called the cops. "I'd like to report a trespasser on HOA-protected land," she said. "He's refusing to leave and has items scattered across our shared shoreline." I didn't interrupt her. I didn't yell. I just went inside, calmly grabbed my folder of documents, and walked back out to the porch, waiting. 2 sheriff deputies arrived within 15 minutes, professional, calm, and clearly familiar with HOA dramatics. Karen ran up to them like she was the mayor. "There," she pointed. "That man's occupying HOA land illegally. He hasn't filed the proper paperwork, and his dock doesn't meet visual standards. I've already issued a notice." The taller deputy turned to me. "Sir, can we see some ID and paperwork?" I handed over the file. Inside was my deed, the property survey, the transfer of title record, the tax map, a riparian rights certificate from the county. The deputy flipped through it for a solid minute, eyebrows rising slightly. "Is your name Protagonist's full name?" "Yes, sir." "And this land here, parcel 17B?" "Yes, sir. Every foot of it." He turned to his partner and said, "It checks out. Private property." Karen's arms dropped. But the Ridgewatch perimeter," she stammered. "That map says." The deputy cut her off. Your HOA map isn't a legal boundary. And this deed predates your HOA by 20 years. He owns this lot, including the dock and the adjacent shore. But he didn't sign the lake access rules. He doesn't have to. This isn't under your authority. Karen tried to argue. She asked for a supervisor. She demanded they enforce the HOA standards. But the law didn't care about her laminated binder or her power trip. The deputies asked her politely to leave. And when she refused, they warned her that continued harassment on private property could lead to a formal citation. She backed off for the moment and stormed back to her SUV, tires spinning gravel behind her. The deputies stayed a minute longer. "Sorry about that," one of them said. "She does this from time to time. Thinks the HOA gives her a badge." I smiled. "You'd be surprised how often I've dealt with that type. You got everything locked down in that paperwork. Every inch of it." He tipped his hat. "Then you're good." And just like that, they left, and I was alone again. Me, the cabin, the lake, and a new fire lit under something I hadn't expected. Because now, this wasn't just a cabin to escape from the world. It was a line in the sand, one I was ready to defend. Karen had shown her hand, and that hand wasn't just about annoying rules or misunderstandings. It was about control. She had no jurisdiction, not legally, but she'd still tried to enforce it, using the one tool that worked on most people: intimidation. She didn't expect me to know my rights. She didn't expect me to have the deed in my hands. And she definitely didn't expect the sheriff to side with me. So now, she wasn't just someone yelling from across a fence. She was a threat, and I planned to deal with that threat the same way I dealt with everything else. Strategically, the cabin was peaceful again for now, but something told me this wasn't over. Karen hadn't lost gracefully. She had retreated, and people like that don't disappear. They regroup, which meant it was my turn to get ahead of her, not just by standing on my own land, but by using every legal means I had to ensure no one like her ever tried to claim a shoreline they never owned again. The lake wasn't just where I live now. It was where I would draw the line. When someone calls the cops on you for standing on your own land, you have two options: let it slide and hope it doesn't happen again, or shut it down at the root. I chose option 2. That night, after the sheriff confirmed I owned the land and Karen stormed off, I sat on the porch and poured myself a drink. The lake was still, the air crisp, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done. She'd made it personal, which meant I had to make it legal. The next morning, I drove into town and made an appointment with a real estate and land use attorney, Judith Harris. Local, sharp, and someone who'd already made a name for herself defending private landowners from HOA overreach. I gave her the whole story: the move-in, the clipboard ambush, the false 911 call, and the sheriff's confirmation that I owned everything from the cabin to the shoreline. She didn't flinch. "This happens more than you think," she said. "HOAs overstep, bluff authority, and bet on people not knowing their rights. But calling the cops on a landowner? That's reckless." I handed her the full document packet. She flipped through it page by page: the deed, the survey map, the title chain, and my riparian rights certification. Then she tapped her pen on the corner of the file. "You're solid. Rock solid. Not only do you own the shoreline, the HOA has no recorded easement, no jurisdiction, no access rights, no say." We filed 2 things that same week: a formal complaint with the county zoning board, asserting HOA harassment and requesting confirmation that Ridgewatch had no legal claim over my parcel or the lake access. An incident report with the sheriff's office, documenting Karen's false 911 call and harassment attempt. The paper trail had begun, but it wasn't enough to prove they had no control over me. I wanted to know how many others Karen had done this to. Judith and I began digging. First, we requested Ridgewatch HOA's publicly available records from the county, including boundary maps, meeting minutes, and submitted documentation from their original charter. What we found wasn't just thin, it was laughable. The HOA's perimeter map, created over a decade ago, used a hand-drawn approximation of the lake's edge and labeled it community-managed lakefront buffer. No legal description, no recorded easement, no agreement with any private landowners. It was, as Judith put it, complete fiction written in fancy font. Next, we reviewed meeting minutes and newsletters going back 5 years. The language used was bold, even aggressive. Unauthorized kayaks must be removed from HOA shoreline. All residents must comply with lake usage standards. No unsightly docks beyond 12 feet without HOA review. The problem? The HOA didn't own a single inch of shoreline. That's when we started talking to neighbors. I walked from cabin to cabin, introducing myself, explaining what happened, and asking if they'd ever received notices from Ridgewatch. And the stories rolled in. One couple said they were fined for hanging string lights on their back deck, violating light pollution code, according to Karen. Another man said he was forced to remove a canoe from his dock after Karen labeled it an abandoned vessel. A retired woman, 2 lots down from me, teared up when she showed me the letter Karen sent calling her gardening shed an unapproved structure and threatening daily fines. None of these people were HOA members. None had ever signed anything. And yet Karen had bullied them for years with letters, citations, and threats. We built a binder. Each story, each email, each citation. Judith titled it, Ridgewatch Overreach, Non-Member File. And then we filed one more thing. A formal petition to the County Land Board requesting enforcement clarification. We asked the county to confirm, in writing, that Ridgewatch HOA had no easement, jurisdiction, or shared access to the lake, that they could not issue citations to non-member parcels, and that any future attempts to do so would be considered actionable harassment. Meanwhile, we prepared a cease and desist letter directed to the HOA board and specifically to Karen Wellington, the acting president. It read in part, "You are hereby instructed to immediately cease all attempts to assert governance, enforcement, or environmental control over Parcel 17B or its lakefront shoreline. Continued action will result in legal escalation, including civil liability for harassment, defamation, and misrepresentation of authority." We sent it certified mail. 2 days later, Karen responded with an email that began with, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," and ended with, "Ridgewatch HOA simply seeks to preserve harmony and standards. I hope we can resolve this without escalation." Translation? She knew she was exposed, but I wasn't stopping there, because this wasn't about resolving. This was about protecting the line, for me, and for every neighbor who'd been cowed into silence. Judith and I began assembling a proposal to file a legal restriction, one that would formally prevent Ridgewatch HOA from making any future claims over my lake access, shoreline, or dock area. It was aggressive, it was unprecedented, and it was 100% legal. Because when someone calls the cops on you for standing on your own land, that's not a misunderstanding. That's a declaration of war. And I was done being polite. The only way to deal with an HOA that thinks it owns what it doesn't is to put it in writing, and then make sure it sticks. That's exactly what I did. After Judith and I collected statements, filed reports, and sent cease and desists, we moved to the final phase of our legal plan, filing a formal restriction against the Ridgewatch HOA. It wasn't just a complaint. This was a deed-based amendment, a registered action filed directly with the county land office that would create a legal easement lockout, clearly stating that no part of Parcel 17B, including lakefront shoreline, dock structure, or riparian access, may be subject to HOA oversight, use, regulation, or entry by any Ridgewatch-affiliated agent, contractor, or officer. In simpler terms, Karen's clipboard would never reach my shoreline again. Once filed, it wouldn't just apply to me. It would be visible on every title search going forward. Any HOA attempt to assert future authority over the land would trigger an automatic civil violation. We served the Ridgewatch HOA with a pre-filing notice. 3 hours later, I got an email from Karen. She was panicking, but hiding it behind pleasantries. "Dear protagonist name, I was surprised to learn about your filing efforts. We always strive for unity here at Ridgewatch and would much prefer open dialogue. Please let me know a convenient time to meet and discuss a cooperative solution before unnecessary legal boundaries go into effect." Unnecessary? She called the cops on me on move-in day. She handed out illegal notices for years. And now she wanted to talk. Judith replied for me. "Any attempt to interfere with our client's rights will be met with immediate court action. There will be no further dialogue." 3 days later, Ridgewatch filed an appeal with the county, trying to block the restriction from going into effect. Their reasoning? Preserving harmonious community lake access. They argued that because so many HOA homes surrounded the lake, they should be granted shared regulatory access for ecological balance and neighborhood unity. Judith destroyed the argument with a single sentence at the hearing. They don't own the lake. They don't have an easement. There is no access agreement. They are requesting powers they've never had over land that's never belonged to them. The appeal was denied. The restriction was filed the next morning. It was official. Ridgewatch HOA was now legally barred from my shoreline. Forever. The story could have ended there. But word got out. Someone in the zoning office leaked the filing to a local reporter who'd been following the tension between lakefront landowners and the Ridgewatch board for months. The headline dropped the following Sunday. Man files legal ban against HOA after false trespass claim. I own the lake. The subheadline was even better. After HOA president calls cops on new resident, court ruling strips HOA of lake authority. Within 48 hours, it hit every Facebook group, Nextdoor thread, and community bulletin board from one end of the county to the other. Karen had made a name for herself, and now it was burned into the internet. The article included everything. The false 911 call, the sheriff siding with me, the property deed proving private lake ownership, the testimonies of neighbors who'd been harassed, and a new legal restriction barring Ridgewatch from touching the water. Karen refused to comment, but the paper got a quote from one HOA member. Karen told us the lake was HOA property. We believed her. Now we're finding out she made it all up. At the next HOA meeting, attendance tripled. The board tried to start the agenda, but residents shouted them down. Why are we paying dues to defend a lie? Who gave Karen permission to speak for all of us? My kids were told they couldn't fish off the dock. On land we don't even own. Karen stood up and tried to talk about community values, but it was too late. Someone held up a printout of the county's public deed map and yelled, "This says we've never had lake access. Why'd you tell us we did?" Another woman shouted, "My husband tore down his entire gazebo because of you." The meeting ended in chaos. 3 board members resigned that week. Karen tried to do damage control. She sent out a newsletter titled, "Clarifying Our Relationship with the Lake." But nobody was interested in her spin, especially when a second news outlet published emails showing that Karen had received legal notices from my attorney weeks before calling the police. She knew the land wasn't hers. She knew the HOA had no claim, and she escalated anyway. Now she was in deep, but I wasn't done. We placed physical signage at the lake's edge, just past the boundary line. Private shoreline. Access by HOA prohibited under county filing hashtag 2024-6193. Below there was a QR code. Scan it, and it took you straight to the public record, stamped and verified. Not only did it reinforce the law, it humiliated Karen every time she saw it. A week later, she stopped coming to meetings altogether. Neighbors said she'd been skipping community walks, avoiding eye contact, and having long conversations with real estate agents on her front lawn. 3 weeks after that, a moving truck appeared in front of her house. She left without saying a word. The HOA was gutted. The board disbanded, then reformed with new members and a new charter, one that clearly limited all enforcement actions to interior subdivision lots and explicitly disclaimed any authority over the lake. One of the new board members actually knocked on my cabin door and said, "Thank you. Seriously, you put up the wall we should have built years ago." So now, the lake is quiet again, not because the noise disappeared, but because it was legally silenced. And every morning when I walk the dock, coffee in hand, I see that metal sign reflecting the sunrise and I smile. Not because it says I won, but because it says no one like her will ever try that again. So people go down swinging. Karen went down whining, then vanished. But not before the whole neighborhood watched her house of cards collapse, one smug, laminated rule at a time. After the legal restriction was filed and the news article blew up, Ridgewatch looked less like a homeowners association and more like a crime scene in slow motion. Karen tried to regain control. She hosted a community transparency meeting at the HOA clubhouse, basically a last-ditch effort to salvage her reputation. She opened with a calm, clipped speech about unfortunate misunderstandings and how some individuals have chosen to interpret land rights too rigidly. But the crowd wasn't buying it. One man interrupted. "You mean the guy you call the cops on? The one who owns the lake?" Another resident stood and said, "My family's dock got removed because you said it violated HOA shoreline codes. Turns out those rules never existed. Where's our apology?" Karen tried to pivot, claimed she acted on assumed easement precedent. Judith was in attendance and calmly read the full legal filing aloud. The room went dead silent. Karen turned pale, and then the yelling started. The next 45 minutes were brutal. Residents lined up to speak. One brought a copy of a $300 citation they'd paid for unauthorized kayak storage. Another showed emails where Karen threatened legal consequences for hanging seasonal flags. A woman from 3 lots down said Karen tried to stop her daughter from swimming off their own dock. Every story pointed back to the same thing: Karen wielding fake authority to control people through fear. The new board, barely a month old, looked overwhelmed. One member finally raised their hand and said, "We didn't approve any of that. None of those rules were real." Karen snapped back. They were real if the community respected them. That was her final mistake. A man in the back stood up. He was older, slow-spoken, but his voice cut through the room like thunder. "Lady, rules ain't real just because you printed them." Applause broke out. Loud, sustained. Karen packed up her clipboard and left mid-meeting. She didn't say a word. The backlash didn't stop there. A petition started circulating. "No more Karen. Remove her permanently." Within 48 hours, it had over 70 signatures, more than half the HOA. The board met privately and voted to censure her, removing her from any committee roles and barring her from community enforcement positions. Karen received the decision by mail. That same week, a for sale sign appeared in her front yard. A neighbor told me she was seen loading boxes in her car before sunrise a few days later. By the time the weekend hit, her house was empty. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't post a farewell email. She didn't even leave a note on the HOA bulletin board. She just disappeared. Meanwhile, the community took a deep breath. The new board worked overtime to restore trust. They rewrote the charter. They purged every rule that had been misused or fabricated. Most importantly, they passed a formal resolution declaring, "Ridgewatch HOA shall exercise no authority, claim, or regulatory effort over non-member parcels or privately owned shoreline property. Any attempt to do so is a violation of board conduct." That sentence was framed and posted in the clubhouse entry. Judith had a copy laminated and mailed to me as a gift. Residents began to speak more freely. People who used to whisper in fear of getting a notice now openly joked about Karen's clipboard. One guy made a t-shirt that said, "I survived Karen's kayak code." Another neighbor restored the floating dock he'd been told to remove 2 years earlier and threw a party on it. Someone even replaced the broken wooden bench near the lake and carved into the side, "Lake access, courtesy of the man who fought back." That man was me. The final closure came when the county land office sent me a letter, stamped, signed, and official. Parcel 17B, status, privately held. No HOA restrictions. Riparian rights affirmed. Regulatory authority, none beyond owner. It wasn't poetic, but it was permanent, and it was mine. Karen didn't just lose her title. She lost her grip, her control, her influence. And when she packed that SUV and drove away, she took her clipboard, her fake maps, and her made-up laws with her. She left behind nothing but silence, and a neighborhood that now knew better. Some victories don't come with applause. They come with quiet mornings, clear skies, and no one knocking on your door with a clipboard. After all the chaos, the legal filings, the HOA tantrums, and the sheriff's visit, I finally stood alone on the dock at sunrise. The lake was still. Not a ripple, not a voice, just birdsong, a cup of coffee in hand, and one very specific sign staked into the soil just behind me. Private shoreline, HOA prohibited. County file hashtag 2024-6193. It didn't shout. It didn't threaten. It just stated the truth. The sign went up the week after Karen's house sold. I kept the design minimal, etched black on bronze, screwed into a cedar post, planted firmly into the land the HOA once falsely claimed. Now, every visitor walking near the lake saw it. Every neighbor who had ever received one of Karen's infamous shoreline violation letters saw it too, and almost every single one of them smiled when they did. In the weeks that followed, people started coming by, not with complaints, but with thanks. One older couple knocked on my cabin door just to shake my hand. She used to terrify us, the man said. We didn't even know we had the right to push back. Another neighbor brought homemade peach preserves and simply said, "Thank you for the wall you built," even if it was just legal. Some folks even started calling the cabin the line in the sand. Not officially, of course, but stuck. The new HOA board took things seriously. They adopted a trimmed-down charter focused strictly on the interior Ridgewatch neighborhood. They formed a compliance subcommittee with actual training and legal oversight. And they released an apology statement mailed to every resident, admitting that past leadership overstepped and pledging to never regulate land or property they don't legally control. They even invited me to join the advisory board. I politely declined because I wasn't interested in rulemaking. I was interested in peace. And now, finally, I had it. The cabin settled into its quiet rhythm again. Grass grew back where Karen once claimed a community walking path. The dock held strong, now reinforced and legal, with no more passive-aggressive notes tied to the railings. And on weekends, I'd take the paddleboard out onto the water, watching the sun scatter across the surface that I knew, without question, was mine. Legally, permanently, undisputed. They say a home is more than wood and nails. Sometimes it's a line on a map, a court filing, a single sentence in a deed that stops a bully in their tracks. Sometimes it's a stand you didn't plan to take until someone tries to push you off your own land. That's what the cabin became. A reminder that you don't need a badge to protect what's yours. Just the facts and the backbone to stand behind them. Sometimes moving in just means unpacking a few boxes, hanging curtains, and settling into a quiet life. And sometimes it means evicting power-hungry rule-makers from a place they never owned in the first place. When Karen called the cops on me for stepping foot on land I legally owned, she wasn't trying to protect the community. She was trying to control it. She didn't check the records, she didn't ask the county, and she definitely didn't expect someone like me to push back. But what she saw as just another homeowner with boxes and a truck was a man holding the deed to the lake she'd falsely ruled over for years. The day she tried to frame me as a trespasser was the day she signed the beginning of her own downfall. So if someone ever shows up with a clipboard and a fake sense of power, trying to intimidate you with rules that don't apply, don't argue. Don't yell. Bring the deed. Bring the truth. Let them see what happens when the law isn't on their side. Because when it comes to land, ownership isn't about who talks the loudest. It's about who holds the line on paper, in court, and at the shoreline. And if they try to claim your lake, make sure the only thing they leave with is a court order.